Monica James, a 21-year-old student from Atlanta, Georgia, had always lived under the watchful eyes of her devout and respected family. Her upbringing was steeped in discipline, faith, and a clear moral compass. Church services on Sundays were a staple of her life, and her parents had instilled in her the virtues of modesty and restraint. Yet, as her peers celebrated the end of the academic year with wild parties, Monica found herself at a crossroads, yearning for a taste of the freedom she had always observed from a distance. On a humid Friday evening in May, she was invited to a party by a classmate she barely knew. At first, she declined, uncomfortable with the idea of attending such an event, but the persistent encouragement of her friends wore her down. She decided to go, reassuring herself that she would only stay for a short while and avoid anything that might tarnish the reputation her family held dear. Dressed modestly yet stylishly, she arrived at a sprawling suburban home pulsating with music and filled with people she recognized only in passing. The party was unlike anything she had experienced before. The air was thick with laughter, music, and the scent of alcohol. Monica's initial hesitance gave way to curiosity as she was offered her first drink, a fruity concoction that masked the sharp taste of alcohol. Nervously, she took a sip, then another. The unfamiliar warmth spread through her, loosening her inhibitions. Encouraged by the approving smiles of those around her, she accepted another drink, then another. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, like she was part of the carefree world her peers seemed to inhabit effortlessly. It was during this haze of newfound confidence that she met Aaron Black. He was tall, with a captivating smile and an air of effortless charm that drew people to him. Monica noticed him almost immediately, and to her surprise, he noticed her too. Aaron approached her with ease, offering her a fresh drink and striking up a conversation. He was attentive, leaning in when she spoke and making her laugh with his wit. His compliments were subtle yet effective, making her feel seen and desired in a way she never had before. As the evening wore on, Aaron became her anchor in the chaotic swirl of the party. He led her to quieter corners of the house, where they could talk without interruption. She found herself trusting him, confiding small details about her life, and reveling in the way he listened so intently. When he suggested they go somewhere quieter, she hesitated briefly, the echo of her upbringing whispering warnings in her mind. But the alcohol dulled her caution, and the thrill of the moment pushed her to follow him. That night, Monica crossed a line she had never imagined herself approaching. Aaron's touch was gentle yet insistent, and his words were filled with reassurances that melted away her lingering doubts. In the dim light of his apartment, the boundaries she had held so tightly dissolved completely. She surrendered to the moment, intoxicated by a mix of alcohol, Aaron's charm, and her own yearning to break free from the confines of her sheltered life. In the days that followed, the glow of that night faded quickly. Aaron became distant, his warmth replaced by indifference. Monica tried to reach out, but her calls and messages went unanswered. The shame of her actions began to weigh heavily on her, compounded by a persistent fatigue and unexplained illness. A visit to the campus clinic confirmed her worst fears. She was HIV positive. The doctor's words blurred together as Monica sat frozen, clutching the test results in her trembling hands. She traced her diagnosis back to Aaron, the man who had so effortlessly won her trust and shattered it in a single night. Through fragmented conversations with others who knew him, she discovered that Aaron had been aware of his status all along. He had deceived her, knowingly exposing her to a life-altering disease without a hint of remorse. The betrayal cut deeper than she thought possible, leaving her reeling with anger and despair. As she left the clinic, the world around her felt unreal. The bright sunlight seemed to mock her, and the bustling streets of Atlanta blurred into a sea of indifferent faces. The teachings of forgiveness and faith that had been her foundation felt distant and hollow. A dark resolve began to take root in her heart. If Aaron could destroy her life without consequences, why should she spare others? Her pain and anger demanded an outlet, and she decided she would make the world feel what she felt, one man at a time. Monica created her new identity with careful deliberation. Under the name Aisha Lawrence, she registered on a popular dating website, crafting a profile designed to attract attention. The photos she chose were tasteful but alluring, just enough to pique curiosity without raising suspicion. Her bio was short and sweet, portraying her as a young, ambitious woman looking for meaningful connections. She knew exactly the type of man she wanted to target, someone who would see her as an escape, someone willing to take risks. It didn't take long for James Collins to find her profile. A 38-year-old accountant, James was married with 2 young children. His messages to her were polite at first, then grew more suggestive as their conversation progressed. Monica played her role perfectly, responding with a mix of modesty and intrigue, drawing him in while maintaining an air of innocence. She let him believe he was the one leading the interaction, subtly steering their exchanges toward a planned meeting. They arranged to meet at an upscale restaurant in the heart of Atlanta. Monica arrived early, dressed in a modest yet flattering outfit that accentuated her youth and charm. She chose her words carefully, projecting an image of a shy but confident young woman eager to please. James, in his tailored suit and polished demeanor, seemed captivated by her from the moment he arrived. Over dinner, she laughed at his jokes, listened intently to his stories, and complimented him in ways that made him feel special and desired. Every move she made was calculated to put him at ease, to lower his guard. When the waiter brought champagne to their table, Monica raised her glass, toasting to new beginnings. James hesitated briefly, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, but he quickly pushed it aside. The alcohol softened the edges of their conversation, making it easier for Monica to guide the evening in the direction she wanted. By the time dessert arrived, James was fully enthralled, leaning closer to her, his words tinged with the excitement of forbidden possibilities. After dinner, Monica suggested continuing their conversation somewhere more private. James, emboldened by her suggestion, offered to book a hotel room nearby. She agreed without hesitation, her expression perfectly composed. In the room, James tried to maintain an air of confidence, but it was clear he was nervous. When he reached for protection, Monica gently stopped him, assuring him there was no need. She smiled softly, her voice calm and persuasive, and his resolve crumbled under her gaze. He let himself believe her, blinded by her beauty and the allure of the moment. The night unfolded exactly as Monica had planned. She played her part with precision, ensuring every detail aligned with her growing sense of control. When James finally fell asleep, she quietly slipped out of the bed and gathered her belongings. Before leaving, she glanced at him one last time, a faint shadow of regret crossing her mind before it was swallowed by her anger and resolve. In the early hours of the morning, Monica walked out of the hotel and disappeared into the city streets. She felt a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. This was her first step, the beginning of a path she had chosen. For James, it was a night of passion with no idea of the consequences. For Monica, it was the first act of a plan that would change everything. Monica fully immersed herself in what she now referred to as her mission. Each day became a calculated series of steps, meticulously planned and executed with chilling precision. Her online persona, Aisha Lawrence, allowed her to move undetected, a phantom drifting between dating apps and social media platforms. She switched between aliases as easily as changing clothes, each identity tailored to appeal to her next target. Her victims came from all walks of life: married businessmen seeking escape, college students looking for casual flings, restaurant workers, teachers, and even a police officer who let his curiosity outweigh his judgment. Her approach was always the same. She began with light-hearted flirting, carefully gauging her target's vulnerabilities and desires. Trust came quickly once she painted herself as the perfect mix of naivety and allure. Conversations would shift from casual to intimate, and by the time they met in person, her victims were fully under her spell. Monica was a master at making them feel special, as if she had chosen them above all others. The night would inevitably end in a hotel room or their apartment, where she carried out her plans with methodical detachment. The encounters blurred together as Monica's list grew longer. She kept detailed records and a password-protected file on her laptop, documenting each man's name, age, profession, and any identifying details. It was her version of accountability, a grim tally of the damage she was inflicting. She convinced herself this was justice, a balancing of scales that the world had tilted against her. But her relentless pursuit began to take its toll. Monica stopped sleeping through the night, plagued by nightmares that replayed her own betrayal and the faces of the men she had deceived. Her appetite waned, and she often skipped meals, too consumed by her growing obsession to notice her own deteriorating health. She spent hours scrolling through profiles, arranging meetings, and planning her next move, leaving little time for anything else. Her once vibrant appearance grew gaunt, her eyes hollow and shadowed from exhaustion. Despite her outward composure, a deep emptiness began to settle within her. The fleeting satisfaction she felt after each encounter quickly dissipated, replaced by a gnawing sense of futility. She moved through her days like a machine, devoid of the passion or clarity that had first driven her. The more men she added to her list, the less she felt like herself. The person staring back at her in the mirror each morning was a stranger, a hollow shell carrying out tasks she no longer fully understood. There were moments when Monica caught glimpses of what she had lost. She would see a couple laughing together at a cafe or a parent holding their child's hand, and for a brief moment her mask of detachment would falter. But she quickly buried those thoughts, reminding herself that she had a purpose, a mission that could not be derailed by sentimentality. Some encounters stood out more than others. There was the young college student who nervously confessed it was his first time, a married teacher who tearfully admitted he felt trapped in his life, and a restaurant manager who brought her flowers, thinking he was courting a genuine connection. Monica played her part flawlessly in each scenario, but she couldn't shake the growing weight of what she was doing. Her actions no longer felt like revenge. They felt like something far darker, something she couldn't name. By the time she reached her 50th encounter, Monica had stopped keeping track of the details. Her list, once precise and orderly, now contained gaps and inconsistencies. She no longer cared about the specifics, the numbers alone were enough. But as the weeks turned into months, the sense of triumph she had anticipated never came. Instead, she felt a creeping dread, an overwhelming sense that she was sinking deeper into a void she couldn't escape. Monica's mission, once fueled by righteous anger, had become an all-consuming obsession. Each name she added to her list brought her further from the person she used to be, leaving her more isolated and fractured than ever. Even as she pressed forward, a part of her began to wonder if there was any way back, or if she had already crossed a line that could never be undone. Monica checked into yet another modest hotel on the outskirts of the city, her routine now second nature. She had chosen this location for its anonymity, a place where no one would remember her face once she walked out. As she waited in the small, dimly lit lobby, she scrolled through her phone, checking the details of her latest meeting. This time, the name on the screen was Derek Williams, a 23-year-old college student. His messages had been polite, even shy, a stark contrast to the confident bravado she had grown used to. She had almost dismissed him but decided at the last minute to follow through. When Derek arrived, Monica noticed immediately how different he was from the men she usually targeted. He was tall and lean, with an awkward yet endearing demeanor. His clothes were neat but simple, suggesting someone who valued practicality over style. His nervous smile and the way he avoided prolonged eye contact hinted at his inexperience, and for a moment, Monica wondered why he had agreed to meet her at all. As they exchanged greetings and walked to the nearby hotel restaurant, she found herself unexpectedly curious about him. Over dinner, Monica began to see layers of Derek that surprised her. He spoke softly, choosing his words with care, and when he looked at her, it wasn't with the hunger or entitlement she had grown to expect. Instead, his gaze held genuine interest, as though he wanted to know her as a person rather than a fleeting conquest. He shared stories about his family, his upbringing in a modest neighborhood, and his dreams of becoming an architect. His passion for his future plans was evident, and his optimism felt disarming. As the conversation continued, Derek confessed something that caught Monica off guard. He had never been in a relationship before. He admitted his inexperience with an almost apologetic tone, as if it was something to be ashamed of. Monica felt a pang of guilt, a rare emotion she hadn't allowed herself in months. She realized he wasn't just innocent in the way she had expected, he was untainted by the cynicism and deceit that had come to define her own life. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Monica didn't feel the need to play a role. She let her guard down, asking him questions about his life and answering his with unexpected honesty. They talked about everything and nothing, his favorite books, her childhood memories, their mutual love for old jazz records. Hours passed unnoticed as they shared bits of themselves, weaving a connection that felt strange and fragile but undeniably real. When they returned to her room, the air was charged with a quiet tension, but it wasn't the kind she was used to. Monica had intended for the night to follow her usual script, but something in her couldn't go through with it. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and invited Derek to sit beside her. They continued talking, their words spilling out in the comfortable rhythm of two people who had known each other far longer than a few hours. Derek's openness had an effect on Monica she hadn't anticipated. His sincerity acted like a mirror, forcing her to confront the person she had become. As he spoke about his dreams and hopes, she felt a flicker of the person she used to be, a girl who believed in love and possibilities, and a future untainted by betrayal and pain. It was as though his presence reached through the walls she had built around herself, exposing the humanity she had buried beneath her anger. They didn't touch that night, not in the way Monica had initially intended. Instead, they shared a closeness that felt far more intimate. When Derek eventually fell asleep, his face relaxed in peaceful innocence, Monica stayed awake, watching him with a mix of wonder and sadness. She felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest, a longing for something she couldn't quite name. For the first time since her life had spiraled into chaos, she questioned the path she was on. As the early morning light seeped through the curtains, Monica knew she had experienced something extraordinary. Derek had reminded her of what it felt like to trust, to connect, and to be seen without judgment. She didn't know what this meant for her or what the next step would be, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. Monica and Derek began spending more time together, their connection growing deeper with each passing day. Their meetings were simple and unpretentious, yet they carried a profound significance for Monica. They strolled through parks hand in hand, savoring the warmth of the sun on their faces and the quiet joy of being together. They visited small local cafes, sharing stories over cups of coffee and indulging in ice cream cones that melted too quickly in the Georgia heat. For the first time in what felt like forever, Monica allowed herself to feel something other than anger and regret. Derek's presence brought a sense of peace she hadn't realized she was missing. Their evenings were filled with quiet laughter and easy conversation. At the movies, Derek would glance at her during the emotional scenes, gauging her reaction with a gentle curiosity. In those moments, Monica felt seen in a way she hadn't since her life had spiraled into chaos. She found herself opening up to him in small ways, sharing fragments of her childhood and the dreams she once had. Derek listened with a sincerity that disarmed her, never interrupting, never judging. With him, she felt a sliver of her old self reemerging, the part of her that believed in love and second chances. Yet, beneath the surface of their growing intimacy, Monica carried the weight of a secret too heavy to ignore. Each time Derek smiled at her, each time he spoke about their future with quiet optimism, the guilt inside her grew louder. She knew she couldn't keep this from him forever. The man who had reminded her of her humanity deserved the truth, even if it risked shattering the fragile bond they had built. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Monica made her decision. They were sitting on a bench near the river, the soft murmur of water creating a cocoon of calm around them. Derek was recounting a story from his childhood, his face lit with the glow of nostalgia. Monica, however, barely heard his words. Her mind was racing, rehearsing the confession she had been dreading. When the moment came, Monica spoke with a trembling voice, each word feeling like a stone dropped into the stillness between them. She told him everything. She explained her diagnosis, the betrayal that had shattered her world, and the path of destruction she had chosen in her anger. She confessed to infecting more than 50 men, each encounter meticulously planned as part of her misguided mission for vengeance. Finally, she told him about the moment she met him, how he had changed her, how his kindness had made her see the darkness she had let consume her. She admitted she no longer wanted to hurt anyone, that she only wanted to live, but she didn't know if she could ever escape the consequences of what she had done. Derek sat in stunned silence, his gaze fixed on the rippling water in front of them. Monica's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for his reaction, each second stretching into an eternity. The weight of his silence was unbearable, but she didn't blame him. She knew the enormity of what she had revealed, and she had no right to expect forgiveness. After what felt like an eternity, Derek finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but there was no mistaking the emotion behind it. He told her he loved her, that he had fallen for the person she was now, not the person she had been. He admitted he didn't know what this meant for them, but he wasn't willing to walk away. Monica felt a wave of relief and sorrow wash over her at once. His words gave her hope, but she knew that the truth would always cast a shadow over their relationship. They parted ways that evening, each retreating to their own thoughts. Derek's confession of love lingered in Monica's mind as she walked back to her apartment, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. Deep down, she knew her past couldn't stay buried forever. The men she had hurt, the lives she had altered, they would eventually catch up to her. What she didn't know was how close that reckoning truly was. Late one evening, Monica was sitting alone in her small apartment, replaying the events of the past few days in her mind. The quiet hum of the city outside offered no comfort as she thought about the weight of her confession to Derek. She had barely eaten or slept since then, her thoughts consumed by fear and uncertainty. A knock at the door broke through her restless haze, sharp and insistent. Confused, she stood and approached the door, peering through the peephole. The sight of uniformed police officers made her stomach drop. Moments later, they were inside, reading her rights as they placed her in handcuffs. Monica barely processed their words, charges of intentionally exposing others to HIV, dozens of victims coming forward, an investigation that had been underway for weeks. Her heart raced as she was led out of her apartment into the flashing lights of police cars. Neighbors watched from their windows, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow. Monica's mind fixated on one thought, Derek. She was convinced he had turned her in, betrayed her after everything she had shared. It wasn't until hours later, sitting in a cold interrogation room, that she learned the truth. The police had been gathering evidence against her long before Derek had entered her life. Complaints from men who had pieced together her identity had led to an investigation that spanned months, tracing her movements and uncovering her aliases. The realization hit her like a blow, leaving her both relieved and devastated. Derek hadn't betrayed her, but the life she had tried to leave behind had finally caught up with her. The trial was a media spectacle, drawing attention far beyond Atlanta. Monica's case became a lightning rod for debates about morality, public health, and the legal system. Each day, she entered the courtroom to the murmur of reporters and spectators. She sat beside her attorney, who argued that her actions were the result of severe psychological trauma. He painted a picture of a young woman driven to desperation by betrayal, acting out of pain rather than malice. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Dozens of men testified, their voices filled with anger, sadness, and sometimes shame. They described how Monica had manipulated them, how she had knowingly put their lives at risk. Some spoke from behind screens, unwilling to face her directly, while others looked her in the eye, their words sharp with condemnation. Monica listened to each testimony in silence, her head bowed, her expression unreadable. Every story was a reminder of the pain she had caused, a weight she would carry for the rest of her life. Among the crowd sat Derek. He came to every session, slipping in quietly and taking a seat at the back of the courtroom. He didn't speak to her, but his presence was a silent testament to his support. Monica noticed him every time, his face a mixture of sorrow and determination. Knowing he was there gave her a sliver of strength, though it didn't lessen the guilt that consumed her. When the verdict was delivered, the air in the courtroom felt heavy with finality. Monica was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Before she was taken away, Derek approached her, his eyes filled with emotion. He spoke softly, his words meant only for her, telling her that he still loved her and would wait for her. Monica didn't know how to respond, her voice caught in her throat. All she could do was nod, tears streaming silently down her face. Prison was both a punishment and a strange form of redemption for Monica. Stripped of her aliases and the layers of deception she had worn for so long, she began to confront the reality of her actions. She started therapy, delving into the anger and pain that had driven her, and found solace in writing. She penned a memoir detailing her life, her choices, and the lessons she had learned, hoping her story might serve as a warning to others. The book gained attention, with proceeds going to organizations supporting victims of HIV and trauma survivors. Monica also became a mentor to other women in the prison, many of whom were dealing with their own histories of pain and betrayal. She shared her story with them, not as an excuse, but as an example of the destructive power of unresolved anger. Slowly, she began to rebuild a sense of purpose, though the weight of her guilt never fully lifted. Her story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how vengeance can spiral out of control, leaving devastation in its wake. Outside the prison walls, it spurred conversations about mental health, accountability, and the importance of forgiveness. Monica knew she could never undo the harm she had caused, but she resolved to spend her remaining years trying to make amends, one step at a time. In the quiet of her cell, she often thought of Derek's words, a faint beacon of hope in the darkness she had created.